But I never really looked at it that way. Like, why did I get a phone call, to go into work? Because like, you start to think about like, if I got the phone call, like, because we usually went back and played our guitars and music. We were in a band together and we usually jammed out. So it was kind of like, well, if I went, I don't know if he would have been in the car with them. So I never really was just like, well, if I went, I would have been in the car. It was just kind of like, that butterfly effect. Like, what if I went? What would have happened? But then, you start thinking about it a little bit more, and sometimes you lose your faith in some stuff. But then, like, I started to get it back a little bit and realized that, like, maybe there's a bigger purpose here. All right, and welcome to the Levels Podcast today. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Robbie Woelkers, and today we've had a lot of people reaching out to us and just wanting to hear, like, a little bit more about me, my backstory, my why. It's just like, they heard that I had clinics and I left them pretty abruptly and started to do this. And people are like, why would you do that? So before I kind of go into more of that stuff, I got to go back in time here to when I was a sophomore in high school. So I was born and raised in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I'm from Dunmore, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Scranton. So if you're familiar with the show The Office, it's literally like the city right next door. Actually was even featured in some of their shows, which is pretty cool. But actually, another show that was featured was Restaurant Impossible with Robert Irvine. If you ever saw the guy with the glasses, the huge guy that goes and tries to save restaurants. So my first job ever was at Anna Maria's restaurant. It was actually, so like my house is right across this little stream. In Pennsylvania, we call them cricks. So my house is right across the creek from Anna Maria's. I then could walk out my front door, walk about 20 feet up, go across a small little bridge, and then I could actually go inside of Anna Maria's, and that was my first job. My mom actually worked with Jeff Saleo, who was my boss at the time. She got me a job there as a dishwasher. I was making a whopping $6 an hour to be able to go and wash dishes. Typically 5-6 hour shifts, $36, call it a day. But one night, it was a Thursday afternoon. It was November 21st. I remember this very vividly, where we were supposed to go out to eat with some of our friends down at Two Brothers Restaurant. There's a street in Dunmore, kind of like a main avenue of sorts, called Drinker Street. A lot of bars on the street, so I think you get the idea. But supposed to be my friends around 6 o'clock. Now, I was 15. I didn't drive. So I'm outside waiting. My mom had a black Ford Taurus at the time, kind of like had a little rust on the wheel a little bit, right? Kind of again, it's kind of, we called it the Batmobile, but it was anything but. And, I'm sitting there, I'm waiting outside, I'm screaming, I'm like, Mom, come on, I got to go. My friends are waiting on me, right? And we don't have phones at the time. So when you call them, right, on the house phone, right, a lot of us didn't have cell phones. So we would call and tell them they were going to be there. So like there was no way to text or call and be like, hey, I'm on my way. It was just, hey, man, I'm going to be there 15, 20 minutes. I'll meet you at the restaurant. And you had to be true to your word or they're going to be sitting there waiting for you. So, I'm telling my mom, like, hey, I got to go. And finally she comes out. It's a little bit after 6. It's about 6:05, 6:08. And she's screaming. She's like, no, you got to come back inside. She's like, Jeff is on the phone. Again, Jeff is my boss across the street, Anna Maria's. And she's like, you got to come. Jeff is calling you. He wants to see if you could come into work tonight. So I remember, kind of like, shrug shoulders, going into my house, walking up the 3 or 4 stairs, grab the phone. I'm like, hey, hello. And he goes, Robbie, I need you to come in. And now you got to understand. So Jeff Saleo went to school with my mom. So he was younger, but the older Jeff, he had the most raspy, like Italian breath you would ever, like it was one, like, so when he says your name, it was kind of like, hey, Robbie, I need you to come in, right? So that real, like, right, raspy kind of Italian voice, he was like 75 years old, heavy smoker kind of sort. So I remember, telling him, it's like, I can't say no to the Godfather. I have to go into work. So decide, hey, I'll go in. And my mom's like, you got to call your friends, right? So I called my friends, told them I wasn't coming. They were kind of bummed out, but went to work. And worked about 5 or 6 hours, made $36, and I thought I was like king of the world at the time. Went across, it was about midnight, went to bed, that was it. Woke up the next morning, got changed for school. Now, the thing about high school is that our high school started about 8:30. And the thing is that our high school started at 8:30, but my dad had to start work at 8. So there was like a before school program. So like if you had to be there early, you could go. They actually like serve breakfast in the cafeteria, which is pretty cool. So we got to eat a hot breakfast most days. Got dropped off at about 7:45. sat there with my friends. And then whenever school started, we just went up to class, kind of like a daycare for high school kids. So I ended up, when my dad pulled up at the school, he let me out, I started walking into school. And it was kind of interesting there. Like when you open up, it was one of those like glass steel, kind of like, glass enclosed, but steel doors, kind of heavy. Open it up. And then when you enter the cafeteria, it's like that old, like if you ever see like garage flooring now where it's kind of like marble and they throw the confetti down and gloss it over, it kind of looked like that. And we had the cafeteria tables that they folded up, and they were the blue rounded tables. And there was like 10 in a row on one side, 10 in a row on the other. And probably about like 40, 50 kids in the morning program before school. And I remember walking in, and I don't know if you ever felt kind of like the pressure of, people just staring at you when you like walk into a room. It's almost like you had all these people talking about you. And, ultimately I walked into the room, and I started to kind of make my way past the first table, the second table, the third table, the fourth table. And I finally get to about the fifth or sixth table, and my friend Amanda was sitting there. And she kind of looked a little, and I don't mean this in a weird way, but she kind of looked a little puffy, kind of like her face was a little swollen, kind of from like, it looked like she was crying or she was upset. I know she had a boyfriend at the time, so I thought something might have happened there. So then I sat down next to her. I was like, hey, what's going on? And she looked at me and she goes, "What are you doing here?" And, I laughed because I was a little caught. I was like, "What are you doing here? You look like you're the one that cried." She's just like, No, what are you doing here? And I said, "I'm going to school. Why? What's up?" And she said, "Oh my God, you don't know." And I was like, "No what? Like I haven't, like, no what?" And she's just like, your best friend, Adam, right? Adam died in a car accident last night, and Owen was the driver. He was in the hospital in ICU. And then the three other guys in the back seat all had a couple had a broken bone here or there, a couple other issues, but they were treated and released from the hospital. But Owen was in rough shape. And then my friend Adam, my best friend, actually died. What happened to him is they went off an embankment, hit a tree, was killed pretty much instantly from the seatbelt. And I remember kind of like running out of the cafeteria, up to the stairs, into the principal's office. I was like, "Hey, is it true?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "Wait here." I remember calling my mom, and then the next couple of days were just kind of a blur. How to go through the funeral and all that stuff. And, the reason I tell you guys that, people always ask me, "Hey, what's your why behind things?" And, I start to sit there, and, there's something called survivor's guilt of sorts. But I never really looked at it that way. Like, why did I get a phone call, to go into work? Because, like, you start to think about, like, if I got the phone call, like, because we usually went back and played our guitars and music. We were in a band together, and we usually jammed out. So it was kind of like, well, if I went, I don't know if he would have been in the car with them. So I never really was just like, well, if I went, I would have been in the car. It was just kind of like, that butterfly effect. Like, what if I went? What would have happened? But then, you start thinking about it a little bit more, and sometimes you lose your faith in some stuff. But then, like, I started to get it back a little bit and realized that, like, maybe there's a bigger purpose here. And for whatever reason, I was called to, stay out of harm's way and go into work and kind of go about my business. And, he got a call for whatever reason. And, I sit here, and when I start to go through things and I'm building businesses and I'm working with people, right, it's really not about money, right? It's made that, right? Fine there, which is very blessed and fortunate. I can't tell you how many times I've been to zero. And I mean, like, not even like zero. I'm talking like negative. And I'm not talking like student loans, you owe money. One time when I was 2018, we had three locations at the time. And one of my student loans, we were consolidating loans, and one of them didn't get transferred over. And what happened is I logged in to my bank account for whatever reason, and I noticed it was all zero. It wasn't even zero. It was like negative, like $150. And, I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have like credit card fraud or identity theft, or someone took all my money. And I was like, hey, no worries. I'm going to have a paycheck coming through because we get paid on Friday. It's Thursday. No worries. Paycheck tomorrow. I'll figure this out. I got to go into work, so went into work. Freaking out the whole day. So then after work, I'm calling people, and they're like, "No, we don't really see anything on your account." I'm like, okay, that's weird. Like, no fraud, no nothing. Like, cancel the card. So cancel the card, getting paid tomorrow, have enough money to pay my bills. Got paid on Friday, boom, taken out again. Like, what in the heck is going on? first time I was ever introduced something called garnishment of wages. Ultimately what happens is if you don't pay a bill and you don't pay it over a certain period of time, which what happened is one of the loans I was getting consolidated with had my address up in Pittsburgh. I never switched it over. So they were sending letters and correspondence up to Pittsburgh. I currently lived in Virginia, never got them. Again, a business owner at the time, a lot going on, kind of needing like an executive assistant to handle this stuff, but didn't. So it didn't transfer over, garnishing my wages, which is crazy. Very, very scary feeling. I had at the time, so 2018, we just had Stella, who's my second child. So kind of like having a newborn around, going to zero, below zero, and trying to figure that out. So the reason why I tell you those stories, kind of just to kind of wrap this all up together, I know you wanted me to hear my why behind things, but I want to kind of let this, because you guys are here and I want to make sure I provide value to you guys, is that disruption will always follow intention. And I want to repeat that again, where disruption always follows intention, right? Small scale is, you want to hire a new provider, they come on, they start onboarding, and your office manager quits, right? You go to find a new location, and you go ahead and put the information in for your lease, and you go ahead and sign it, and then you fail building inspection, right? Or insert 101 other examples, right? You hit all-time highs in visits and evals, and for whatever reason, your billing company couldn't keep up with the volume, and now you have cash flow issues, right? So it's one of those things that we need to understand, that disruption follows intentions. Now, again, I don't know why I'm here. I think there's some, bigger picture stuff that it's out of my control, and that's totally fine, and I'm at peace with that. And so that way, when I go about my business and do things, I just go back to that day where I got the phone call, and I just remembered that, like, hey, there's a reason here. And I know some people use the analogy like, hey, when you pass away and you go up and you're there and St. Pete's there waiting for you, and he's got the book and he's like, this is what I had planned. What happened? I want to get up there and they have the book there, and they're like, this is what I had planned. And then he just lifts up his hand and gives me a high five, and he's like, good job, because I exceeded the expectations, not meet it. And I think that's kind of like why I keep doing what I'm doing. And I just want you guys to understand that too. So if you ever feel like when, disruption shows up, I want you kind of like think of the Heisman, where you're like, hey, nice try, but you're not stopping me, right? Because I have bigger things to kind of handle here and kind of achieve. So again, guys, thank you so much for tuning into the Levels podcast. We're going to have a lot of awesome content. We're going to be teaching more about our scars than our triumph. That's why we call them the Levels podcast, because at each level, there's going to be this disruption. And when you bring intention, there's going to be something that wants to block you. Our job is to help you through that learning curve. So then that way you can kind of borrow our belief when you don't believe in yourself. So it's just like borrow our belief. We've seen it 100 times, just kind of get through the learning curve. And there's greener pastures on the other side. Promise you that. But sometimes you're so close to that disruption that it makes you a little nervous and you want to go back into your comfort zone. So just know that we're here to be able to help, and hopefully that this podcast is a way for you guys to, break some really cool barriers in your life and achieve some amazing things. So thank you again for tuning into this podcast. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Take care.